Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Hello, test, 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 test. Test, test. Tests. Test, 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 test. Hello, test, test, test. Hello, test, test, test. Hello, test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Oh yeah, that's good. Yep, and yep. Hello, test, test, test. Hello, test, test, test. Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Test, test with fresh air, hello.
Out of the heart. This ultimately indicates how hard the heart has to work in order to circulate that blood. A high systolic reading may suggest the heart is exerting too much effort, a potential indicator of hypertension. On the flip side, our diastolic blood pressure is the bottom number that we see, and this represents the lowest pressure in the arteries when the heart is relaxed between beats. It measures the resistance to blood flow within our arteries. Elevated diastolic pressure could mean that the arteries are either narrow or they could even be too stiff, increasing the risk for heart disease, stroke, as well as other health issues. A typical blood pressure should be around 120/80, but ideal ranges are going to vary depending on the individual as well as age. Structurally, the nervous system is divided into two main regions. We have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The CNS is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord, functioning as the primary command center for processing information. In contrast, our PNS includes all of our nervous system elements, such as our nerves distributed throughout the body. The PNS gathers sensory information and relays it to our CNS, which then processes that data and coordinates motor responses and regulates bodily functions. As we look at the brain, we're going to categorize it into three main regions. We have the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Starting with our hindbrain, it is composed of three main areas. We have the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the cerebellum. The medulla oblongata, which is this region right about here, regulates vital functions, including things like breathing, blood pressure, and heart rate. The pons also supports these functions and helps coordinate communication between our forebrain and the cerebellum. And then lastly, our cerebellum plays a key role when it comes to balancing and coordinating movements. An easy way that I like to remember these three things is the medulla manages, the pons passes, and the cerebellum coordinates. As you know, the medulla manages essential bodily functions that we've talked about when it comes to motor control, monitoring heart rate, as well as modulating breathing. The pons passes messages between the brain and the body, and it plays a critical role when it comes to the patterns of breathing and participates in our sleep cycles. And then lastly, the cerebellum coordinates complex voluntary movements. It controls balance and it calibrates muscle activity to ensure smooth and balanced motion. Next up, let's talk about our midbrain, which is located deep within the brain. It's essential for maintaining alertness and managing our sleep-wake cycle, as well as overseeing some of our motor activities. An easy way that I like to remember how the midbrain functions is I like to use the mnemonic mid-controls, which stands for movement, involvement in the sleep-wake cycle, and detection of auditory and visual reflexes. Starting with movement, the midbrain is involved in motor movements and coordination, particularly eye movement and other reflexive responses. When it comes to the involvement of our sleep-wake cycle, it plays a crucial role when it comes to maintaining our alertness and regulating that sleep-wake cycle. And then lastly, we have detection of auditory and visual reflexes. The midbrain processes that auditory and visual signals, contributing to the reflective responses we get whenever we're introduced to a stimuli. Next up, we have the forebrain, which contains our cerebrum, which is the largest and most developed part of our brain. It features a distinct fissure that actually runs down the middle of our brain, dividing it into two hemispheres. We have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. But what do we mean by it's the most developed part of our brain? Well, primarily the cerebral hemisphere houses the primary motor and sensory cortices. When I mention the word cortices, I'm referring to the plural form of cortex. The cortex is simply the cerebrum's outer layer. It's about 1 to 5 millimeters thick, and it's actually composed of gray matter, as you can see here in this picture. When we're examining a neuron, there's a few key components that we need to identify. We have the cell body, we have the axon, and we have the axon terminal. The axon terminal is typically going to connect to another neuron. What's important to note is that the axon is enclosed in this myelin sheath, which is made up of fats and lipids, and they appear to be white. Therefore, in the brain, we have gray matter, which consists of the neuron cell bodies in the area where the synapsing actually occurs, while white matter is primarily composed of those axons in the myelin sheaths. This distinction is crucial because gray matter is where information is integrated and processed, essentially where the brain makes sense of the incoming data. In contrast, white matter acts like highways, simply facilitating that rapid transmission of signals from one area of the brain to another. So as we talked about before, within our cerebral hemispheres lies the primary motor and sensory cortices, representing the highest level of neural activity. For example, the primary motor cortex located in our frontal lobe, if you take a look here, that's that purple area, that deep purple area right there. This is the area that's crucial for initiating voluntary or conscious motor movements. For example, if you decide to start walking, this initiation actually occurs right here in our brain, marking it as the highest level of which motor activity is controlled. Similarly, the sensory cortex processes incoming information from both our external and internal environments, enabling us to consciously be aware of what's going on. This actually occurs right here where you see this dark teal on our brain. This area represents the highest level of sensory information integration. For example, when you touch a hot surface, it's that sensory cortex that processes this sensation, alerting you of the heat and enabling you to react appropriately to get your hand away from that hot surface. Within the cerebral hemispheres, we find association areas that augment the functions of both our primary motor and our sensory cortices. These areas are going to integrate past and present information, enabling comparison and contrast of what is already known. This process is going to enrich our understanding and providing us a deeper analysis of complex information. For instance, while the primary motor cortex may initiate basic actions like walking, it's really that association area that enhances the capability by allowing the sequencing and planning of more intricate tasks. So let's take, for example, if you were dancing in ballet or executing a series of martial art movements. The association area of the motor cortex would be engaged, enabling the planning and sequencing of these more elaborate activities. When we're examining the sensory cortex, which is located up here in our parietal lobe, this association cortices play a crucial role when it comes to helping you interpret the type of sensory information that you're going to encounter. For example, using the earlier example of touching that hot stove, the primary sensory cortex alerts you of the sensation of heat. But it's the association cortex that then further analyzes that information. It assesses the temperature and considers whether it's really just warm or scalding hot. This area also draws upon past experiences, like previous encounters with heat, to help us identify and understand the sensation. Thus, that association cortex is integrated into our memories and current sensation. It's going to aid in our primary somatosensory cortex. The cerebral hemispheres are also going to serve as the foundation of our conscious experience. When we become consciously aware of something, it is because that sensory information or thought processes have reached our cortex. As we discussed before, this cortex is that thin layer, about 1 to 5 millimeters thick, enveloping the outermost part of our hemisphere. It is within this critical layer that our consciousness emerges, allowing us to become more aware of the experiences around us. While the deeper areas of our brain may receive sensory information or initiate decisions about motor movements, these processes do not enter our conscious awareness unless they reach our cerebral cortex. Therefore, for us to consciously be aware of sensations, thoughts, and actions, they must be processed through the superficial layer of our cerebral hemispheres. This is where all elements necessary for conscious awareness are integrated and interpreted. The cerebral hemispheres also house our limbic system, which plays a crucial role when it comes to memory and the emotional dimension of behavior. Let's consider various emotional aspects of our daily life, such as relating to eating, relationships, reproduction, and the fight or flight response. It's the limbic system that influences all of these. Furthermore, the limbic system is integral to the highest level of cognitive function found in our cerebral hemispheres. Cognitive functions encompass activities such as planning, making judgments, experiencing emotions, reasoning, and ensuring that behavior is appropriate to the context. Much of our cognitive processing occurs in the frontal lobe, specifically known as the prefrontal cortex. If we have damage that occurs in this area, it is going to significantly impair our behavior, planning, and other cognitive functions, highlighting its importance in managing complex behaviors and decision-making processes. And lastly, we have our occipital lobe, which is back here, and we have our temporal lobe, which is right here. The occipital lobe's primary functions include processing, integration, and interpretation of visual and vision stimuli. This area houses the primary visual cortex, where visual signals are received from our retinas. And our temporal lobe is important for processing auditory information, and it's home to our primary auditory cortex. It plays a key role in the formation of our long-term memory. It's also involved in speech comprehension through our Wernicke areas, which is on the left temporal lobe, and it also assists in recognizing and processing emotion and language. So I wanted to give you an easy memory trick when it comes to remembering what each lobe does. So we're going to start with the frontal lobe. I want you to think forehead frontal lobe. It's symbolizing our deep thought and decision-making processes. So when it comes to the parietal lobe, I want you to associate it with a parachute because it's covering the top part of our head, and it's related to the sensory input from our body below. Our occipital lobe, which is located here in the back, connects to our optics and our ocular, focusing on our role when it comes to vision. And then lastly, when it comes to the temporal lobe, which is kind of right here on the side, I want you to link it to tempo when it comes to music, reflecting on its connection when it comes to hearing and rhythm in speech and memories. So now that we've covered the central nervous system, what about that peripheral nervous system? From a functional perspective, the PNS can be further categorized into two main parts. We have our somatic nervous system and we have our autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is primarily responsible when it comes to the motor functions of our skeletal muscles, both encompassing the voluntary actions that are under our conscious control and the somatic reflexes, which are not. On the other hand, we have our autonomic nervous system, which primarily manages our body's internal environment, regulating functions related to our gastrointestinal, excretory, and endocrine systems, as well as smooth and cardiac muscle activities. It also governs autonomic reflexes. And the autonomic nervous system can indeed be split even further. Yes, there's more divisions taking place. We have the sympathetic nervous system and we have the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, which is the shorter name of the two, is easy to remember because it's associated with the rapid fight or flight response. Instead of that typical example of running from a bear, let's say you're suddenly standing in front of a vending machine. Your snack has just gotten stuck and it's out of reach, while there's a long line forming behind you for those who also want to get